looking at the parables of Jesus as they're recorded in Luke's Gospel. And tonight we're starting the first of three stories that actually all kind of go together. This is the parable of the lost sheep, the lost coin, and then what we often call the prodigal son. These three all deal with lostness, and we're going to look at them one at a time. I thought very briefly about just handling all three parables at once, but that's way too much to try to get done. So we're going to look at these in close detail. Luke 15 is found in your Pew Bible there on page 1623, and we'll read verses 1 through 7. Luke 15, verses 1 through 7. Let's listen now to God's Word. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear him. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Then Jesus told them this parable. "Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Does he not leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, 'Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep.' I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent." This is the word of the Lord. Brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ, a few years back, I got a birthday card in the mail. I brought it with me. I know you probably won't be able to see it, but funny thing is it came from a corporation. It's one of these ones they send out to all their customers or whatever, so it wasn't a very personal card. But I kept it because, well, I'll tell you about the card. It's a photograph of a person. You can see these are a whole bunch of sheep in the countryside. I guess it's taken in Italy. And there's probably 24 sheep there, a couple more down there. And then you see the shepherd. You probably can't see him very well, but he's just kind of standing very leisurely. It's almost like he's leaning on his shepherd's staff, just watching over the sheep and kind of making sure that, no wild animals come their way and, just doing his shepherding thing. And I kept that picture. I don't think the person who sent it to me or the company who sent me, I don't think they even knew I was a pastor, but when I got the card, I thought, that kind of reminds me of pastoral ministry a little bit. So even though it's, just in the inside, it's just a stamp and a company logo, I kept it and I keep it on my shelf because I like the picture. And I also, when I was reading these words from Luke chapter 15, this picture came to mind because I think this is the sort of picture we often think of when we consider this parable. Right? Jesus and the good shepherd who goes out looking for the sheep and finds it and brings it home, cares for the sheep. I think that's really how we imagine this story. That's probably the first picture that comes to mind. And that's all true, as we'll see. But Jesus has he has almost two layers of meaning to this story. The first is what I just summarized for you. We'll look at that a little bit. But the main part of this story, the main message, is would have been a very disturbing, troubling message to the people that Jesus was giving this parable. And I'll show you how we know that. In Luke chapter 15, let me say this, all these three parables, they're part of one large text that all holds together. Three parables, lost sons, lost coin, and then the one we're looking at tonight, the lost sheep. These are three parables about lostness. And Jesus tells them all one right after the other, and he tells them because there's a conflict, actually. I said very early on that one of the ways we can understand the meaning of the parables is by looking at the setting. And if you look at the setting in verse 1 you read that tax collectors and sinners are gathering around to hear Jesus. Now, I don't know how much you know about tax collectors and sinners. Tax collectors, you may know, were people who were really hated by Jewish people in the first century. And they were hated because they were seen as traitors. You had the Roman government that comes in and imposes their way of life, their culture, their government on the Jewish people. And the Jewish people didn't like that, obviously, you can imagine. And then among the Jewish people, you had a small group of people who saw an opportunity here. they said to themselves, okay, the Roman government's going to come in and they're going to impose Roman way of life on us. We can make some money in this. We'll agree to collect taxes for the Romans from our fellow Jewish people. And so that's what they did. So you have these Jewish people who were working as pawns of the Roman government. And not only that, but it was like the Roman government said to them, okay, here's what you need to collect. Here's how much you need to collect from each person for taxes. Whatever it was, X number of dollars. I don't even know what it was. Beyond that, take whatever you want. And so that's what they did. They were, tax collectors were seen as very greedy people. They took advantage of their fellow Jewish people to pad the pockets of the Roman government. So you can imagine how that went over. Right? People couldn't stand tax collectors. Now, you have sinners there. Now, our NIV is actually very helpful here. It puts that word sinners in italics, right? Because it wants us to understand, hey, Luke isn't calling these people sinners. This is how they were known in those days. They were known as the people, you know how sometimes today we have people and the first thing that we think about them is their sins, right? We label them right away. There were people like that in those days as well. These were people with a past. They were people with a history. They were people who were known by their moral failures, by their sins, by their shortcomings. So you have these people that, you have sinners and you have tax collectors. You talk about the dregs of society. People couldn't stand these people. And yet, they are drawn to Jesus. Did you see that in verse 1? They're gathering around Jesus to hear him. Something about Jesus is drawing these bottom-of-the-barrel people to Jesus. Something about Jesus was very attractive to these sinners and tax collectors. And then you have, in verse 2, you have the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. Now, you probably know a little bit about the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. They were the religious experts. They knew their Bibles inside and out. They might be what you call today seminary professors, with no offense to seminary professors, but they, in terms of knowledge of theology and doctrine and biblical knowledge, these were the experts. These were the people who knew their stuff very, very well. And they're sitting around, and they see these people hanging around Jesus. And in their minds, they're saying, wait a minute, something doesn't fit here. Jesus claims to be sent from God. He claims to be a prophet. He even claims to be God. So what is he doing with all these disgusting, despicable people? It didn't make sense in their minds, right? What is Jesus doing? If Jesus really was God, he would know what she did last weekend. He would know what that person was up to over the week. Jesus would know. So what is Jesus doing with these disgusting, despicable sinners? Now, if we really, I think, want to grasp the impact of this parable, we have to stop for a moment and just ask ourselves a question. And that question is maybe an uncomfortable one to ask, but the question that I think we need to wrestle with is, do we see any of that Pharisee inside of us? Do we see any of that Pharisaical tendency inside of us? I heard a seminary professor, this time a good one, Frank, and he said something once along the lines, he said, there's a Pharisee inside of every one of us trying to get out. And I thought that was an excellent point, because I think our sinful nature tends to have a little dose of Pharisee. Right? There's a little bit inside of every one of us that wants to look down on people who are really, really messed up, who've made terrible mistakes, who are in lifestyles that we know are not pleasing to God. And so we have to ask ourselves, where do we see that? Maybe a way to get at it is to say, do the people that are considered by our culture and our society today, but the people who are considered as sinners, are they drawn to us? Is there something about us that is attractive, that would be attractive to a person stuck in a lifestyle of sin? Or maybe thinking that on a church-wide level, is our church a place that would be attractive to the tax collectors and sinners of our day? Do we have something that is gracious, that is appealing, that offers life and hope and grace to those who are struggling with sin? Maybe to put it in concrete terms, if someone next week, Sunday morning, walked into our church Somehow we found out that they were living a lifestyle that we knew was pretty clearly contrary to God's will. And if that somehow came out, how would we react? How would we think of them? How would we speak to them? How would we act towards them? See, I think that's important. Those are important questions to ask. How would we react, right? Where do we see ourselves in the story? Now, that's where the tension lies in the story. You've got the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, and you've got the who are just muttering and grumbling about the sinners and the tax collectors. And Jesus, in response, he tells this story. He tells the story of the shepherd who goes looking for the lost sheep. But notice, if you have your Bibles open still in front of you, look at verse 3. Actually, look at verse 4. As Jesus begins to tell the story, look at what he does. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep. Do you see what he's done there? Right away, he's drawn the Pharisees into the story. He looks at them and says, okay, now imagine yourself as a shepherd. And what he's doing there is he's actually trying to have them empathize with someone who has lost something of value. Right? Suppose one of you loses a sheep. And if you lost a sheep, you would go and do everything you could to go and find it. You would go seeking the sheep. Right? Another way to say it would be, look, if you were a shepherd, you would go looking for a sheep because that sheep has value to you. That sheep means something to you. Some of the commentaries that I looked at said that, in all honesty, I'm not 100% sure that this is the way it was back then, but it makes a little bit of sense. So I'll put it up there as a possibility. It's possible that some of the shepherds in those days would be held financially responsible if a sheep got away from them. And so, they're watching the sheep and managing the flock on behalf of a landowner or a wealthy person, and a sheep got lost. Well, then the shepherd would have to shell out to replace the sheep. Again, I don't know if that's 100% true, but certainly the idea is true that if you value something, if something matters to you, if something is significant to you, you go and you do whatever you can to find it. You go to whatever lengths you have to go through to get it back again. And that's what the shepherd does. He goes off in the rocky places or the places where they were earlier in the day. Whatever he does, he goes and he finds that sheep because that sheep has value to him. And what the point Jesus is trying to make is, look, God values lost sinners. And when the shepherd finds the sheep and rejoices over it, Jesus is implying, look, God rejoices over finding that which was lost. God rejoices because lost sinners are precious to him, and when they repent and when they return, there is rejoicing in heaven. And not only that, but did you notice that the shepherd, he invites other people into the celebration? I don't know if that was commonplace back then. It struck me as a little bit odd. You go and you find a sheep and, hey, bring the neighbors in, let's party. But that's what Jesus says that the shepherd does. He gets the neighbors and he says, you need to celebrate with me. I want to share my joy over finding what was lost. In the same way, God invites his people to join in the celebration when the lost are found. And of course, the Pharisees aren't doing that. The Pharisees are grumbling and murmuring and muttering. And Jesus is trying to put a mirror up to them and saying, look, your reaction here is all wrong. You should be rejoicing. You should be joining the celebrating in heaven over the lost that have been found. Now, that's kind of the first layer of this parable, right? Jesus and God the Father are joyful when repentant sinners return. The second layer is what I hinted at earlier. It's much more provocative, right? These are words that actually were meant to, they would have struck a sore spot with the Pharisees. And to understand this, you have to recognize something. In the Old Testament, I kind of said this earlier in the service, but God reveals himself repeatedly as a shepherd. He reveals himself repeatedly as a shepherd. Take a look. You don't have to turn it up, but just listen. Isaiah chapter 40, verse 11 is one of these places in the Old Testament where the prophet Isaiah is speaking to Israel, and he's giving really a promise and a picture of what God is like. Isaiah says this, God will tend his flock like a shepherd. He will gather his lambs in his arms. He will carry them in his bosom and will gently lead those that are with young. And that's a kind of classic summary Old Testament text. God is a shepherd to his people. cares for them, nurtures them, sustains them, protects them, all those things. Not only that, but one of the ways that God exercised care for his people, one of the ways that God shepherded his people was by appointing under-shepherds. The spiritual leaders of Israel, the priests and the prophets and the kings, right, the religious and spiritual leaders, they also, in the Old Testament, were called shepherds. They shepherded on behalf of the shepherd. They were called to exercise the same care for the people of Israel that God exercised. So the spiritual leaders of Israel were shepherds working on behalf of the shepherd. However, what happened in Israel? Well, one of the big charges that God had, one of the big faults that God had with his people in the Old Testament was that their leaders had failed. There's this wonderful and disturbing passage in Ezekiel chapter 34. Matter of fact, in I think 3 weeks, we're going to be looking at that passage in our morning service, because this is a profound text in the Old Testament where God says to the leaders of Israel, the prophets and the priests and the kings, he says, you shepherds have failed. You failed miserably. And in Ezekiel 34, the prophet goes on, he says, you've scattered the flock. You haven't gone searching for them. You haven't cared that they are lost. You haven't gone looking for the stray sheep. You've just left them vulnerable. You've left them exposed to the wild animals. And God is very angry with the spiritual leaders, his under-shepherds, for failing to shepherd the sheep. Now, with that background in mind, you have to hear what Jesus is saying. He's saying, okay, you've got a lost sheep. You, spiritual leaders, you Pharisees, you teachers of the law, you should be going after the lost sheep. You should be going and searching for the sheep. But you're not. You're indifferent. You don't care about the lost sheep. You don't care about sinners and tax collectors. In other words, what Jesus is saying is, look, you look down your noses at these sinners, at these tax collectors, at these people who are spiritually struggling. You look down your noses at them, but you don't realize that they are lost in part because of you. You haven't cared for them. You haven't shepherded them like you were supposed to. And the underlying message is that Jesus is communicating is, you will be held accountable. You are the shepherd. You are the shepherd who's supposed to be caring for the sheep. And how you care and how you carry out your duties, you will be held accountable for that. That's the message that Jesus is driving home to these Pharisees. Now that's disturbing. If you're a Pharisee hearing that, you're being accused of failed spiritual leadership. See, God is concerned. He's deeply concerned for the lost. He's concerned for lost sheep. And then the pivotal question then for us is, do we share that concern for lost sheep? Do we share that concern for those who are lost, for those who are spiritually wandering, for those who are spiritually troubled, for those who are living broken lives? Do we share God's concern for them? Right? Our hearts are called to beat with the same heart that God has for lost sheep. How do we do that? What does that look like? How do we express concern for the lost? Well, I think one of the things that this parable suggests is that caring for lost sheep involves seeking them when they're lost. And seeking, look, it's an intentional thing, isn't it? I don't want to stretch the meaning of this parable too far, but I mean, when the sheep is lost, the shepherd doesn't say, you know what, I think we're missing a sheep. Well, maybe tomorrow we'll come across it. Maybe we'll go looking for good grassland tomorrow, and hopefully we'll find it. No. The shepherd says, okay, I've got to go find that sheep. And he leaves the flock of 99 to go looking for the lost. He goes intentionally seeking the lost sheep. And I think there's a parallel there that suggests how we are called to share in that seeking. I think it doesn't happen by accident. I think it's caring for lost sheep takes an investment. It's building relationships over time. It's getting to know the people that you see on an everyday basis. It might be people, say at the grocery store. Sometimes I'll go and work maybe once or twice a week at Roth's grocery store. Just work in the coffee shop there. Get to know the names of the employees and who they are, a little bit more about them. And I started doing that long time ago because I wanted to at least just make some connections in the neighborhood, in the community, and I found that you'd be surprised what people will share with you from time to time. Once you get to know them a little bit, once you become a familiar face. And then the other part of it is that when you know a person, when you intentionally build a relationship with non-believers, you'd be surprised that when they face a hardship in life, they will see you as a spiritual resource for them. Again, not to overstretch the meaning of the parable here, but it's, this sheep is vulnerable. This sheep that is lost is suddenly weak. It's exposed. It's at risk. When you build a relationship with a person and suddenly a family member gets sick, or they lose a job, or they face some sort of crisis, if you have a relationship of care and concern with them, they will look to you, and you have the opportunity to go to them and provide encouragement, to write them a card or a note or something, to pray with them, to tell them, hey, I'm going to pray for you. That makes a huge difference. We have our Salem Free Clinics, which we do here, help with once a month. One of the things that I do when I'm there, and one of the things that it's really been a privilege for me, is I'm the prayer. So when people come in, they don't have to have prayer. That's completely optional. But just about everyone that goes into the clinic for help, they almost always ask for prayer. Almost hardly ever do they turn that down. And most of them, well, I don't know, not all of them are necessarily believers. But because they're going through a health problem in life, they are eager to and they're open to prayer. And so, and then as they start sharing, a lot of times they don't just kind of say, yeah, here's what I'm here to see the doctor about. They actually talk about family problems, relationship problems, this going on, loss of a job. They open right up. And then the chance to just pray with them, to listen, to show concern, and then to bring those things before God in prayer. It's really it's a privilege, but it's also an incredible opportunity to minister to those who are lost. And then, so seeking the lost, and then mimicking the joy of the Good Shepherd. Mimicking the joy of the Good Shepherd. Come back to that question that we asked a little bit ago. When someone were to come to church next Sunday morning, and you find out somehow that their life is something is not what God would intend, how do you react? Well, I think Jesus would call us to at least see with joy that something has caused this person to come seeking spiritual comfort, spiritual help. See? Do you share that joy? Now, I'm not saying that you overlook sin. The Bible never does that. Jesus doesn't do that. He always deals with the problem of sin in a person's life. But there's also called to be joy when a person comes seeking the grace that is offered in Jesus Christ, and when a person turns from a life of sin to embrace Christ as Savior. That's joy. Right? Do we share that joy? Do we share that joy? One of the things that Jesus is doing here, I already kind of hinted at this, but one of the things that Jesus is doing, not just in this parable, but with all three of these parables that hang together, he's trying to challenge us. He's trying to have us rethink what it means to be lost. See, in this instance, we think that it's or at least the Pharisees think that it's the sinners and the tax collectors who are lost. And yeah, in a way they were. But what Jesus wants us to see, and what he wants the Pharisees to see, is that they too were just as lost. And that's what the parable, we'll get to that in a couple of weeks, but the parable of the prodigal son points that out. The parable of the prodigal son, remember who was found in the end? It was the one who'd gone away and lived a wild life. He was the one who joined the party, while the older brother, who was the good, the righteous one, he's still outside the party at the end of the story. Right? So Jesus is challenging us to rethink what it means to be lost. Again, in this case, we think that it's the Pharisees it's the sinners and the tax collectors who are lost. They're the lost sheep. But the irony in the story that Jesus points out is that the lost ones are the shepherds, because they failed to do their job. Right? Jesus is holding up that mirror again. And he's saying, look, here's what you shepherds should have been doing. You didn't do it. You're lost. You're more lost than you realize, because you don't even know you're lost. For us, I think the challenge is, and I guess maybe the way to say it is, if we want to share the concern that Christ has for the lost, if we want to be people who are eager in reaching out to those around us, we first have to realize, to hold up that mirror to ourselves and recognize that we too were the lost ones. we too are just as lost. We're not any less lost than anyone else. We are just as much in need of the Good Shepherd coming to find us as anyone else, as the very same people would be tempted to point the finger at. We need the Good Shepherd to find us too. And indeed, that's what he's done. Jesus, the Good Shepherd, lays down his life for us, and we need that grace just as much as the next person. And the party and the celebration and the rejoicing in heaven that takes place, once upon a time, that rejoicing was over us responding to the grace given to us in Christ. The party was once for us. The party in heaven was once over us turning to Christ. Now, if we believe that, if we know that, if we are convinced in our heart of hearts that that is true, that will absolutely transform how we live, how we see the lost. We will have a passion to seek them unlike anything else. When I was, a couple weeks ago when I was on vacation, I read a book. It was a wonderful book about a person who struggled with alcoholism. And one of the things that came out in this book was kind of a glimpse into the life of going to AA and what that was all about. And it was, it struck me that Alcoholics Anonymous, AA, there's something that they get about grace that maybe we sometimes miss out on. When the people sit down and they start their meetings, they have to be open about struggles that they've had. Maybe ways that they've messed up during the week or ways they've been tempted. They have to be open about that. And if the irony is that if you sit down in one of those meetings and you say, you know what, I'm not an alcoholic and I don't struggle really with this, everyone else knows that you're only fooling yourself. See, in other words, you know that you're well and you know you're on the road to recovery when you are able to admit that you have the problem. And the grace that is shown to those, it's remarkable because everyone there knows that they struggle. They know they're weak. They know they are in need of God's grace, and they even admit that. It's one of the 12 steps. It strikes me that there's something there that they see and they understand about grace. You see, we are the ones that, to the degree that we admit that we have the problem, is the degree that we're able to be moving forward and growing in the grace that Christ gives. Right? You can't admit you're lost. You'll never be on your way to being found. Admitting that you're lost has to come first. And when you admit you're lost, the Good Shepherd finds us, brings us home, and rejoices. Let's share in that joy. Let's be people who rejoice and who passionately seek the lost with Christ. Let's pray. God, we thank you that you are a God who comes searching for us, a God who seeks us. Truthfully, if it were up to us to come seeking you, none of us would ever come. We prefer to remain far from you, but you came to us. You came to us in Jesus and found us. And you changed us and transformed us so utterly and so completely. But Lord, we have to confess and we have to admit that sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we look at other people and we think they were way more lost than we are. And they're way more broken than we are. But Lord, that's an illusion. We have to be willing and ready to admit our lostness, to know that we too were in need of a Savior just as much as anyone else. Lord, help us to remember that, but help us to be diligent in seeking the lost. Help us to share your heart and your concern for the lost. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Our song of response is number 590.